And I spoke to my father. I didn't speak to my mother or other. I spoke to my father. I said, look, I did, of course, I was studying music all through. And he said, if you want to do it, of course. But he said, you have to be very serious. And then he started teaching me violin immediately.
So you played the violin?
Very little, because I went to Vienna, and then I started studying.
How did you get from Mumbai to Vienna? What was the process that was? Why Vienna?
But I had a cousin there, who was 3 years older than me, who was a refugee from Shanghai, where he grew up with my father's eldest brother. And he was studying in Vienna, and therefore my parents had the trust to send me, because I was 18. And he said, come, look, send him and I'll take care of him. And so we actually lived together in the Vienna woods for the first 6 months until we couldn't stand each other and I moved out. But it was because my cousin was there. And he was a very good pianist.
Who did you study with in Vienna, and when did you decide you wanted to be a conductor?
No, conducting I always wanted to do right from the beginning, because that's the instrument I grew up with my father's semi-amateur, semi-professional orchestra. And I have to tell you, that orchestra was made of Parsi amateurs, Goans, professional Goans, Catholics from Goa, and Jewish refugees formed the string section. The wind and brass section were formed by the Navy band. So the concerts were with the amateurs and professional string players playing in tuxedos and the Navy band in uniform. It was a strange sight, that orchestra. And my father would have to, of course, rehearse it 2 or 3 languages according to whatever language was spoken in that band by the individuals.
And there was enough sheet music available so you could put
this was available, yeah. And my father was not the conductor, the first concertmaster.
I see.
And there was a Belgian gentleman also living in Bombay. He took up the conducting of the orchestra.
But your father was very involved with young people, with youth orchestras, wasn't he?
That was in America.
Yeah, I think I met him.
He had enormous amount of teaching in Bombay. And then, of course, with the first ship that left Bombay after the war, he was on it to go to New York to study, and to study the violin from scratch. He started, as we say, on open strings with a great teacher called Ivan Galamian, who was then the teacher of Itzhak and Pinky, and teacher of Midori-san, who brought up the great generation of American violinists, and my father studied with him for 4 years.
But how did you get, so you now studied in Vienna, and then you went to Montreal. How did you get the position as the conductor of the Montreal Orchestra?
I substituted in those days for every ailing conductor. How people got to know about me, I don't really know. Slightly also because I had won the Liverpool conducting competition. That gave me a little bit of notoriety. And Lucas Foss, a great American composer and pianist, he got to know me at Tanglewood. And he got me an agent, a wonderful old German, Jewish, Siegfried Hurst was his name, who also taught me a great deal about the profession, who would sit with me for hours. And Lucas brought me to him. Recently I found out that Siegfried Hurst was studying at Montreal at McGill University, which I knew, but I didn't know that his roommate was von Ribbentrop.
Oh my God.
In the early 30s, who then left, became Hitler's foreign minister.
Right.
Did you know another story about, do you know who Arlozorov was? Arlozorov was a great freedom fighter with Ben-Gurion and Jabotinsky in Israel. And Arlosoroff came from Germany with a German Christian lady, and they lived in a kibbutz. And at one point, she having the upsurge of Nazism, she suddenly felt this great nationalistic fervor, and she left him. She went back to Germany and became Mrs. Goebbels. Now, when you know a little bit about Israel, there is not one city or village in Israel without an Arlosoroff street. That Arlosoroff was living at the kibbutz with Mrs. Goebbels. This is something.
Well, speaking about resistance, now that in all these years with the Israeli Philharmonic and your travels abroad, have you met much resistance from governments politically against the Israeli Philharmonic because they're from Israel, obviously?
Well, about half the world doesn't invite us.
But there have ever been demonstrations? Or?
Sometimes, not too much.
Not too much.
Sometimes. We once played Mahler's Fifth Symphony in Melbourne. Melbourne today has a very modern air-conditioned hall, but back then we played at the city town hall, and in the month of March it was 105 degrees on stage, playing Mahler's Fifth Symphony and hearing both Jews and Arabs demonstrating outside. And it was not an airtight hall where we could hear them screaming at each other and playing Mahler's Fifth. But that was rare. Once there was a demonstration against the orchestra at the University of Michigan in Ann Arbor. And once...
Why in Ann Arbor? That's unusual. Why?
It was students.
Was it during any political unrest in the Middle East?
I can't remember. There's always political unrest. You know, there are not 2 weeks where this country doesn't go through some kind of crisis or the other.
Does it affect the orchestra?
I don't notice it anymore, but there was because there's so much television. But when there was no television in Israel, every Israeli on the hour would listen to the news in the 60s and 70s. It was a religious sort of a tradition. They had to listen to the news every hour.
What did you do with the orchestra when you were rehearsing? Speaking about controversy, what kind of resistance did you have when you introduced Richard Wagner to the Israelis?
There was not really too much resistance from our public, but there were people who knew that I was going to play Prelude and Liebestod from Tristan and Isolde of Wagner after the concert, because I wouldn't dare program it. So when the concert was over, I told the public, I said, I think we are living in a democracy where we speak and we eat what we want, and we should also be able to perform. And there was no real outcry.